Historical Society, and we're delighted to have our illustrious leader here today. So we will talk about that. You are welcome to keep your video on if you want, or turn off both your audio and video. We will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and I will review that again when we start in just a minute. All right, it is 11:59. So I am going to give myself a countdown to get started. We will be recording this today so that you will be able to refer to it later. So here we go. Okay, I am Lynn Wheeler, the program chair for the Historical Society Program Committee. And I would first like to tell you a little bit about events coming up at the Historical Society. We have several things coming up. First of all, Mimi Ashcraft is doing another fabulous cemetery tour with David Bowie, I think this week, and it's already sold out. So you can't come to that. This is Mimi's second sold out tour this year. So watch for more. It's a wonderful event, and it's going to be a great joy. And it looks like the weather should cooperate for Saturday. That's Saturday at 10. And also then in June, we have several very interesting events. Our box lunch talk, and you may have seen the slide, will be Jim Schreiber, back by popular demand. This time he will be talking about rural free delivery, the history of that, which really Carroll County was at the forefront of rural free delivery. And Jim will give an outstanding talk. And Chris and her team at the Historical Society is planning a temporary exhibit to go along with that. Also on June 26th, we have a fully packed day of activity. We are going to be participating with Pipe Creek and the folks doing the Corbett's Charge activity. They will be coming to the Historical Society, so be sure to check out the Historical Society website for information on that. We will be doing a virtual exhibit to go along with that. Also that night, we will be having our virtual gala. We're very excited about this. We're working with the fabulous folks at the Community Media Center. Frank Badovic and a team are putting together a superb virtual gala, which will be from 7 to 8 on June 26th. It will feature Eric Bird and a wonderful dance troupe doing dances that convey the history of communication in Carroll County. So please be sure to check that out. We will also have an online auction and many other things of interest, but I think it'll be a wonderful hour. It's also, it can be streamed. It can be seen on HD 1086. And we really, really hope that you will join us for that event. And now, and continue to check the Historical Society website, because we have, back by popular demand, our Bluegrass, Bocce, and Bourbon event in September. Fabulous bluegrass music at Rob's Bluegrass Barn. And there are many other activities happening. So please be sure to check the Historical Society website for all of those. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Chris McMasters. Now, Chris is an amazing woman who, after retiring, agreed to come to run the Historical Society as a volunteer during our time of greatest need. And she has done a magnificent job. She's full of energy, full of great ideas, and just a true gift to the Historical Society, I can tell you. If you haven't had a chance to get to know or work with Chris, she has a BA in anthropology from the University of Michigan, an MA in anthropology from the University of South Carolina. She has served as an adjunct professor, both at University of Maryland, Baltimore County and Gettysburg College, and taught other classes in archaeology. She has run a number of private businesses over the years and came to Baltimore and lived in Fells Point when she first came here and enjoyed this area so much. She bought a historic home in Westminster and has lived here ever since. She grew up in Chicago. She first came here in '84, working for the Maryland Historic Trust as project archaeologist for the Fells Point project in Baltimore, Maryland. She then came here, started a new adventure, bought a house that dates from 1870, and it is a beauty, and currently is very, very much involved in both church activities and volunteer activities in our county. And so it is my great honor to turn the mic over to Chris. One more thing I want to mention is before she retired, right before she took the job as volunteer head of the Historical Society, she was an archaeologist and grants manager for the American Battlefields Protection Program as part of the National Park Service. So comes with tremendous background, and we are truly very, very fortunate to have Chris heading up our team and planning many, many exciting things. So we hope you'll check out our website. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn. Boy, that was quite an intro. I love it. Thank you. Today we're going to be talking about the Westminster Historic District Commission. Let me see if I can't share this. Can you see this correctly, Lynn?
Yes, I can. It's perfect. Yes.
Fabulous. Great. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on with the Westminster Historic District Commission and local tax credits for historic structures. However, before any of you drop off and say, well, I don't care, I don't live in Westminster, I want you to know that our tax credit program was built at about the same time or a little bit after the state tax credit program and the federal tax credit program. And so you're going to hear an awful lot of things that exactly match the state program and the federal program. And I'll talk a little bit more about that then as we go through the talk. But just so you know, please don't drop off because all this stuff pretty much winds into the same kind of ends with tax credit and incentives. So let's see if I can advance this next. All right, so I'm currently the interim executive director for the Historical Society, but I am also the chair of the Westminster Historic District Commission. I've been with the commission almost 20 years. I've only been the chair though for maybe, I don't know, 5-10 years in there. And I've really enjoyed serving this community because I used to work next to the Federal Tax Act people. So if there ever became a question about how we were working our tax credits, I could just walk over to the federal people on my lunch break and ask them, you know, would you do it this way or would you consider things this way? So it's been a joy to be part and supporting the city of Westminster as an appointee. So that's a terrible graphic. I admit it, but that's what they have online right now with the website. If you wonder what is the National Historic District for Westminster, it's the red line. And these tax credits work for anything within the red line. And that was the area that was nominated in 1978 as part of our National Historic District. Now, taking a step back, let's talk about national historic districts and state historic districts and local districts. They're all separately appointed. So the National Historic District has to be approved by the federal level at the National Park Service. So it runs through the state, but it's approved by the feds. The state has areas they designate. They designate houses and they designate specific districts. But that is a state level, and it's got their own register of what's important. We also have a local historic district within our National Historic Zone. So there really can be 3 different levels of importance. I'm just going to talk about what we do with the Westminster Historic District Commission, and that is within the national zone. We've adopted the national zone, the red zone, as being what we consider having valuable historic structures to preserve and maintain. So as a commission, we review applications for tax credits, and we sponsor occasionally events to raise awareness of the value of the historic resources in our community. And as I mentioned, we are appointed by the mayor. Okay, so this is in the code if you want to look it up. The code's really long, so I only took a little snippet, but basically it's our purpose of having this historic zone managed by a commission is to preserve historic sites, structures, the district, even archaeological and architectural values. And basically, this is declared by the mayor and common council to have a public purpose in the city. And when you say, well, what would that public purpose be? Believe it or not, there have been studies done that show that places with historic structures that are intact, districts that have intact historic clumpings of things actually have a higher property value. And so by maintaining these structures in a district together, they make up a patchwork quilt that has great value. And I like that thought about a patchwork quilt. The patches themselves are not that valuable, but when it's put together and stitched together into a district or a quilt itself, then you have something important. So the purposes are to safeguard our heritage, to stabilize and improve property values, to foster civic beauty, to strengthen the local economy, and to promote preservation and appreciation. It's easy to sometimes lose these ideas when you're managing actually the local historic district zone, because there's a lot more to it than just beautification. And every once in a while, we've had people come to us misunderstanding that we're really here to safeguard the heritage, thinking that wouldn't it be more beautiful if we took this old building and just raised it or leveled it? You know, we actually have other values as well to promote the preservation of the historic, I call it historic fabric. Again, thinking of that quilt imagery. By keeping track of the historic pieces that we have, it's important as part of a whole. Okay. So what structures are eligible? I showed you that awful graphic with the red line. Those structures have to be within that district. However, Christopher Weeks wrote a book called The Building of Westminster in Maryland, and Mr. Weeks was commissioned just before the bicentennial to write this book of all the historic structures in Westminster at the time of the bicentennial. So he went through and surveyed over 1,500 properties, and that's normally the historical things that are eligible are things that are 50 years and older. And that is what he fashioned into a nomination to the National Historic Register. So we're one of the early districts. We're not too detailed in our National Register nomination. And there are a lot of houses that were there in the 1970s that were nominated. At the time, you sort of had to agree or at least not disagree to be listed. Today, actually, it's a whole lot harder to get on the National Register. The criteria is a little stricter than it used to be. A vast majority of the community has to agree to be put on the National Register. And it's very hard to get entire communities to agree to do this because they think it's going to somehow inhibit their ability to manage their own property. If you're wondering whether or not your structure is eligible for the Westminster Historic District, you can check with the city staff and they can look up your address within our mapping and see if your structure is available. You can do this with the state as well. The state has all their structures and areas online. So if you want to know if your house is already listed on a state listing, you can look that up online. If you want to know whether you're on the National Register, the state or the Maryland Historical Trust also hosts online those records as well. And sometimes you may not think of it, but you might be on a heritage area. Much of Carroll County, Washington County, and Frederick County is within the heart of the Civil War heritage area. So you might be eligible for state and national tax credits by virtue of being in one of those areas. So that's the kind of thing you can check with the Maryland Historic Trust. All I can say is if you're within our red line of the Westminster, city of Westminster, you're definitely eligible. All right, so what construction is eligible? There's pages and pages of things of our standards that we have online. Lots and lots of projects that support historic structures are eligible as a matter of, what kind of work can be supported. The one thing I'll say to you though is if you're putting in sweat equity, your own time is not recompensed. If you're putting in your own flooring, we can pay for the flooring, but we can't pay you for your hours putting that flooring down. The same is true with painting. We can pay you for the gallon of paint that you buy, but we cannot give you tax credits for the hours you put in painting. So this is really a program that's best.
Civil Society of Carroll County, Kristen speaking.
This is best supported by.
I'm just fine.
Christina, could you turn off your audio, please? This is best supported by a contractor. So if you get work done, that's the best way to set up your budget. So your standards are wide and your projects ought to be talked over really with city staff. So here's a very big secret. We have had a very, very smart mayor and city council when this was set up in the bicentennial. They based our legislation for our ordinance on the state of Maryland. And the state of Maryland based their regulations and guidelines on the federal tax incentive program. All three levels of government were trying to achieve the same thing. So for example, if we approve a state level type of project or a federal level type of project, we'll all be in agreement because we don't have different sets of guidelines. That's also really good for us locally because then as things change over time, we don't need to change up any of our guidance on what historical work would be considered acceptable. We can just say, if the state approved it, we would approve it. If the feds approved it, we would approve it. Let me give you a good example. There was a time when all the rage was to put old windows out and put the new double pane glass windows in. Some of them were basically vinyl and they took out wood historic windows and put in vinyl windows. Well, actually, research was done later to find that when you put a storm window over an historic wooden window, you actually get much better insulation. It's a much higher level of insulation than even brand new vinyl windows. Once we figured that research out, we were able to say, hey, look, it's better for the structure and frankly, better for you in the long run with your pocket to put just storms up instead of replacing windows wholesale. So those kind of standards and research are done at the federal level. And if they approve something, then the state normally does, and we definitely do too. So we use the same standards, techniques, and rules. So for us on the city level of our project that you would get done by a contractor, we can offer you a 10% incentive. 10% of your project would be considered eligible for a tax incentive. On the state level, you can get a 20% less the filing fee of your construction. On the federal level, if you're a commercial property, you can get another 20%. And this could all be for the same project. So in Westminster, we're one of 2 local districts in all of Maryland, the other one is Hyattsville, that could roll up all 3 levels of government on the same program, enjoying the same tax incentive. 50% off a construction project is not bad. Now, of course, there got to be more rules, right? All these projects recognize that it's more difficult to maintain historic properties. It just is. They need special preservation technique and approaches. Sometimes the cheapest way to manage a project or a problem may not be the best way in the long run. So these incentives are meant to offset the increased cost of taking care of your historic properties. This is not a bonanza. This is not a government giveaway. In fact, it's regulated preservation treatments that are eligible, and they may not always be the cheapest or the easiest, but they will service the preservation of the structure long after current owners move away. So it's considered an offset, not a giveaway. All right. So let me give you some highlights for our local tax incentive. It's got to be projects over $5,000, and you have 2 whole years to do those projects. So you might want to combine some little projects like replace your gutters, update your electrical, and put up a couple of storm windows. That could be $5,000. You can do it with various contractors, and you'll want to combine them over 2 years. Okay. This must be necessary to the preservation of the old structure, okay, not damaging. So for example, I've heard of people say, you know, if I had some money, I'd blast out all the plaster so I could see the brick walls. Well, most preservationists would consider that to be damaging. It may be aesthetically pleasing. You may want to see those old brick walls, but from a preservation point of view, blasting out historic plaster is damaging. It's not actually preserving and protecting. So the project actually has to have the aim of preserving all the old fabric that you have left. Okay. Next, you really have to ask permission, whether you're looking for tax incentives in the city of Westminster, in the state, or from the feds. All your work has to be approved of in advance. So you have to get your paperwork lined up. You have to have your budgets lined up. You have to have your case made, and everybody has to sign off that they approve that this work is going to happen. You can't do work and come back retroactively and say, well, we did the work the way you would have wanted us to do it. Nope, you got to stick with the approved work. Secondly, you got to go with a concept that's called replace in kind. And that is if you're removing parts of a slate roof, you're going to want to replace it with slate. If you're removing parts of a wooden porch, you're going to want to replace it with something that is by and large more wood than composite. What you're going to do is replace things in kind. This is not just a matter of replacing things so you can't tell. It's replacing in kind the best you can do. So I've heard of situations where old asphalt roofs were replaced, and it's fine. It's to replace that with other asphalt roofs, but you can't go from a wooden shake roof and replace it with an asphalt roof. That's not considered replacement in kind. Unfortunately, our specific tax credit program does not address landscape issues. Okay, so if it's not with the historic structure, unfortunately, you can't reshape your lawn, for instance, for better drainage for the building. It just is considered landscape. Cosmetic improvements. Let's just say you don't like the old bathroom. Unfortunately, that's not considered a necessity to maintain a historic structure. And that's true on the local, state, and federal level. If you just don't like the color of the paint, you can't get that under a tax incentive program. Lastly, you have to stick to the plan that you agreed on. However, sometimes as you're opening up old buildings, there needs to be a change. We get that, but you have to run through that change through each level of authority that you made the original agreement with. So changes can happen pretty quickly. Sometimes they're not serious changes at all. Sometimes you can find that things are a lot worse than you thought they were, and you really need to get a change order. Bad examples of preservation that will not fly. I might as well give them to you right off the bat. Sandblasting brick walls. We found over time that does a lot of damage to the brick, and so that kind of activity would not be approved. Using the wrong cement mortar on walls. Often Portland cement is actually harder than the historic brick and will cause fracturing over time. So you got to use the right mortar. You got to match that mortar to what's there. Otherwise, the bricks themselves get damaged and you have a much bigger problem than a mortar issue. I gave you an earlier example of ripping off a slate roof and just replacing it with an asphalt roof. That might be a whole lot cheaper, but unfortunately, that's not supported by the tax credit. The tax credit supports the offset cost of the addition of the slate roof in theory. So it wouldn't pay for an asphalt roof. Adding an addition to the building that's sort of twice as big as the original building. You can use tax credits to add new additions to historic structures, but they have to be additions that are in keeping with what's there. You can't add an addition that's much, much bigger than the original structure. And in our case, we do give a 5% tax incentive for brand new work. Ripping out old walls to give the structure an open concept. That's really bad from a historic preservation point of view. We understand you might want a bigger kitchen and get rid of your old dining room, and ripping out a wall would help you do that. We just can't support that as a preservation activity. That's more of a cosmetic activity or just a choice activity. It doesn't really preserve the historic bones of the building. Lastly, updating a kitchen to give it a new modern look. Again, it's got to be a matter of function, whether or not kitchen areas are updated at all. If you want a new, sleek, modern look, maybe you shouldn't be in a historic house, basically. All right, so the application on the city side is so simple, it's just one page. City staff can help you fill it out. I've even been known to help people fill them out. You do need to include a budget. That's a second page, but the application itself is only one page. And you'll note here where it says pre-construction and post-construction, we use the same one page for both the beginning of the project and the end of the project. You'll have to give us some photos so we can see what you're going to do. You'll have to prepare this little package of budget and photos and the form and a little narrative of what you're going to do, and give the city staff 15 days to prepare it for HCD review. We meet the first Wednesday of the month and we talk about the decision on the spot. You can come and attend and make your case. Sometimes it's good because we can actually ask you questions if something in the application wasn't really clear. A commissioner will be happy to pre-read your package just to make sure that at that meeting, you get your decision, I sign off on it, and you can walk away and begin your work. It's pretty speedy on a local level. On a state level, it's not quite so speedy, but you need to give them time. They've got a bigger application and they will forward a federal application on your behalf. So there's a little time that needs to be built in for both the state and the feds. The money part, how do you actually get your money for this tax incentive? Well, you have to pay your taxes. You can't have fallen behind on your city taxes. Once you're done with your project and you've proved it up with some receipts, the city will send you a check for the amount of taxes you paid. And you can continue requesting that until you've used up your tax incentive that you were eligible for, up to 5 years. All right, so let me give you a really basic example on a small job. Let's say you have a 19th century wall leak and the project needs to be hand raked out with failing mortar, and you replace it with the double O lime mixed mortar, and you match that mortar and finish it by hand. That's the project. The Historic District Commission would approve a proposed project like that. The cost is only $10,000, let's say, and you're going to get it done in 2 years easily. So you have receipts and you have photos of the work that's done. The Historic District Commission will take your package of the completed work and approve it. Then you get my signature on an approval slip and you go to the city planning representative with the signed paperwork. Let's say your current tax year is $1,300 for the property. Of the $10,000, you're eligible for 10%. So a $1,000 check would be paid to the homeowner and mailed to you. That's a simple one. It's a simple, basic project. Let's say you have a pretty big project. You have a 1950s HVAC system that's failing and it's not at all efficient, and you want to propose replacing the heating system and the air system. So the HCD would approve a project like that. Let's say it costs $20,000 or $30,000 and you get it done in 2 years with your receipts and your photo. The HCD approves that completed package and you go to the city rep with the signed paperwork, and your current tax is $1,300 for the property and you're all paid up. So for the first year you ask, you'll get $1,300 and it's paid to the homeowner on year 1. You ask again on year 2 and you get $1,300. The remainder in year 3, you ask for $400 and you get your total $3,000 incentive from the city. Okay, that's for a pretty big job. Let's say $30,000. Let's do a complete redo, something huge. You want to remove an entire standing seam roof that needs to be replaced in kind. You have an HVAC system you need to get replaced, your basement's flooding, and your floors are failing. Oof, sounds like a bad place to live. Let's say the HCD does approve your proposed project, and the whole project's going to be $150,000 done in 2 years with receipts and photos. Again, the HCD approves the package. You go to the city planner with signed paperwork. Your current tax burden is $2,000 a year and you're paid up. So your first year you get $2,000. Your second year you get $2,000 when you request it. Third year, the fourth year, and the fifth year. Your total incentive that you're eligible for is $15,000, but you'll only get $10,000 because that's all that has been collected from the city in 5 years. That might hit you like a thud, like, oh no, I thought I was getting 10% back. How come I'm not getting 15,000? That's because you can only ask for what you've paid in every year. You can't ask for more than what you've paid in. So you kind of have to really look at the math. I hate to say it, don't let your house get into this bad a shape of repair. and it's really good, best for that sort of smaller to mid-sized projects. So talk to your financial advisor, your tax preparer, before you start in on any really, really big projects, because you might be slightly disappointed with not being able to reap your whole 10%. Now, how to get more from the state? You know, if your house is outside of the city, but you're eligible by the state for some heritage area or because it's listed. It's a slightly different program, but basically the rules are the same. You go to the Maryland Historic Trust and you submit their paperwork with a photo and a budget and a statement if need. You get their approval as that you're a historic property on step 1. You get the project approval on step 2. You do the approved work. You complete the final paperwork and submit it to Maryland Historic Trust with your photos, your final budget, your receipts, and wait for their final approval. With the trust, you'll receive a letter indicating that you have successfully completed, let's say, $100,000 project that you're entitled to, then $200,000 or $20,000. You take that letter to your tax preparer at that time, and you get the whole $20,000 back, less what you owe that year for taxes. So I did a huge redo on my home, and one year I got like $33,000 back from the state immediately. So the state will give you more than you pay in for taxes, but the locals will not. Does that make sense? Okay. We'll go on next. How to get even more from the feds. So the feds go through the Maryland Historic Trust and submit the same project for commercial properties only. Unfortunately, the feds do not have a tax incentive for residential properties, only commercial properties. So again, you have to do their approval paperwork through the Maryland Historic Trust. So really, it's only a stop through them. They'll have to establish your historic property. They'll have to approve your work again on step 2. You'll do the approved work. You complete the final paperwork and submit it to the Maryland Historic Trust with your photos, your final budget, your receipts, and wait for their approval. You receive a letter indicating you've successfully completed your, let's say, $100,000 project and that you're entitled to $20,000 from the feds. You take your letter to your tax preparer at tax time, just like the state, and you get your whole $20,000, again, less what you owe for that tax year. So if you're a commercial property in the city of Westminster, you can see how bundling this together can really make a huge difference. If you plan your projects, think over 10 years of what you're going to need in your historic structure. Maybe you know in 10 years you're going to have to replace the HVAC system, the plumbing needs updating, and that the windows are leaky and need a storm set of windows, and your gutters are in poor repair, but you can set them up over time so that in this 2-year period we're going to do this, and in this 2-year period we're going to do this, and then we're going to take a break for 2 years, and then the last 2-year period we're going to do something else. I mean, have a big plan in your head of what it's going to take to get your historic preservation done on your structure. Lump them together, lump smaller projects together to hit your $5,000 threshold. A lot of people will say, I don't have $5,000 today, or none of my projects rise to the level of $5,000. But in a 2-year period, you may very well hit that $5,000 threshold. So think ahead about lumping real small projects in. Get input from the city staff as you're working on it. And if you work it right on a commercial property that needs rehab, you could get almost 50% of it supported by tax incentives. Okay, so don't wait too long. Don't wait till your structure is in such bad shape that you don't get to reap the rewards of all of what's available out there. And in the end, everybody has big, happy smiles all around, and we have a lovely historic community to enjoy. And certainly the hope is that we all really value and appreciate our historic structures and understand that we're all in this together. You know, again, when businesses come to me and say, but I don't want to do the expensive route. I want to do the cheapest route possible. And I also want you to help us pay for that. Or even worse, sometimes businesses will come and say, we just want to do a demo and start over again. To me, that's like taking out one of your teeth and your smile. You know, we want to have a big, happy smile, all those teeth still there. And we really want our lovely community to shine. on our flag for the city of Westminster, it says Historic Westminster. That's because the history is so valued here. And so I encourage everyone to think about, if you're in the city, how to take advantage of these tax credits. And if you're not, looking at your historic homes and finding out through the state if you're eligible for state assistance that works the very same way with the very same standards. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Chris, thank you very much for that outstanding look at the opportunities that historic preservation offers. That's really, really great. And if you'd like to ask questions, you may either ask questions through chat, or you can just unmute yourself and come on in. And you can unmute your audio and video if you have any questions for Chris. So please come on in. We've got a few people unmuting, so hopefully they'll have some questions for you.
I can tell you, I did the state and local applications for my own house. I've kind of been through the ringer on how to do it. It's a little bit of paperwork. It's a little onerous, but the bottom line is it's really worth it in the long run. And, you know, the Historic Commission is really there to help you. So maybe you don't know who to ask how to do the project right, or what contractor or vendor will work with you. And we're there to give you some ideas, because we see several of these applications, you know, every year come by, and we can sort of see which contractors ended up following through on what was approved.
Christine, I have a question. This is Paul.
Hey, Paul, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing wonderful, and fabulous presentation. Very, very helpful, and very lots of knowledge. So for municipalities outside of Westminster in Carroll County, do they fall under other local districts by chance?
So there are municipalities, especially Uniontown, that has its own local historic district, and probably a commission that manages it. However, only Westminster and Hyattsville are the only two in all of the state of Maryland that has a tax incentive. Believe it or not, we are very forward thinking here in the city of Westminster. However, Paul, you can apply to the state, and because I know your property is commercial, you will have the state apply on your behalf to the feds. So although you don't get that 10%, there's every chance you'll get 40%.
Okay. And then a second question is, do the restrictions to your property carry on in perpetuality? I didn't say that right.
Yeah, in perpetuity. All right. So it used to be that if the state got involved with anything, there was a permanent preservation easement slapped on the property. Nowadays, for these tax assessments, their tax incentives, there is a 5-year easement of preservation. And I really think the biggest thing is they don't want to do work that you're going to come along and muck up within 5 years. I guess they're more than willing to let you muck up things after 5 years, but they don't want you working on the property and changing things within the 5-year period. Again, you need to talk with the state and the feds and make sure that information is still accurate.
If you have violated some of the things that are a no-no in prior years in renovations, does that preclude you from being qualified?
That's such a good question. So sometimes I see just heart-wrenching things when I'm dealing with homeowners. I know that on Church Street where I live, there's a homeowner that put a sign up that said woodwork available, and he literally was selling the mantles and some of the doors and things from his house because he wanted to modernize his house. So for the most part, the Historic District Commission, the state, and the feds won't look at houses and blame you for bad work that was done before, for the most part. However, if a homeowner has done so much damage that the house has no longer really got integrity, it really can't even be on the register anymore, they won't support it. So I'm thinking about a house across the street from me that all the windows have been replaced. So you got all brand new vinyl windows in that poor historic house. And that there was some beautiful historic lighting that was put around a front door, and they ripped out that door and put in a brand new door. They put vinyl siding over the brick. So I know they've drilled holes all over that brick, and they put a new asphalt roof on that house. So at that point, it's almost not recognizable as a historic house anymore. With that level of damage, also, I know they blasted out a lot of the plaster inside to look at the brick. It's at a point where it's almost a loss. Its original historic fabric isn't even really there and left to be saved. So with that level of previous damage, it's pretty iffy as to whether or not the Historic District Commission would support putting good federal, state, and local funds into a house that has been that damaged. It would be a real close call, that's for sure.
Chris, we have a question on chat from Diana Scott. What happens when a property burns and there is only a hole in streetscape in a historic district?
Okay, well, I can give you a great example. Do you all remember the Fat Cat on Main Street? So the Fat Cat burned, and it was actually
now rare opportunity, right? Now rare.
It burned from like the second floor up, and there was water damage in the bottom floor. And that was an immense project, even though their taxes are pretty high. The cost of rebuilding that building was very, very high. And Westminster was able to offer them 10% of the cost as part of their tax incentive. I'm pretty sure they went for state and local money, although I can't honestly tell you for sure because I don't really remember their financial side of things. But they rebuilt as true as they could to the scale of the original building, and they put in updates as they went. So they added all new plumbing and all new electrical. That kind of utilities were all redone when the building was in ashes. So yes, historic tax incentives can be helpful when there is something catastrophic that happens. Also, if there's a new building that wants to be added to the back of a historic structure, some new construction of some sort, it's got to remain part of the historic building. It can't be like a garage or a storage shed or something in the backyard. But if it becomes an addition to a historic structure, 5% can be applied in that situation.
Chris, perhaps you said this, but forgive me, I didn't hear it. Now, do you have an archive people can look through to get ideas?
Well, the book, The Building of Westminster, is a wonderful reference because it's got all the historic structures with a little write-up, and it's got all kinds of photographs. If you need ideas, to me, ideas sort of hit me as sort of creative ideas. Actually, the historic district would really prefer you stick with what you have historically. So let me give you an example. This is kind of a rural community off away from an urban center. The chances of anyone having gold faucets in their bathrooms or medallions on the ceilings of an average room are pretty low. So you would have a tough time arguing that that's a historic attribute that wants to be put into a historic house. It's just not likely that it would have been there historically. We wouldn't want to support someone getting creative about historic attributes and just adding things on so that the building somehow looks more historic than it is. Does that make sense?
I have a question. Well, I have two questions. So a lot of just more of a clarification. So as far as function of a house would be concerned, we want to be historic, like the sewer line was failing, so that could be possibly covered under that. And then to me, that kind of also, like, it's edging on landscaping, but really, there's techniques like lining a sewer line that could preserve where existing has and not destroy existing walls or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be covered under that, right?
Normally it would be, again, when you kind of get to questions that are kind of 50-50, you need to talk about it with the commission and get their heads up before you begin.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And my other question was like, what about like a restoring function to like we have a home that has some transfer windows in it, and somebody's removed the hinges and, you know, plastered or taped. I haven't gotten under the paint to see how they've got them secured in there, but that's something I'd be interested in restoring. Now, obviously that wouldn't be a high cost function unless, you know, I find someone that's like a historic blacksmith and, you know, forged me 1920s era or whatever, you know. But would that kind of stuff, like restoring function, also follow under some of these possible money tax incentives and stuff?
It actually would, because we want to see functioning windows so that they don't get put up for replacement. So that kind of thing is actually a preservation activity that we would encourage.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Chris, you have another question from Diana Scott, and you've partially answered this, but here it is. How do you find qualified contractors to do the work properly? Do you provide a list of contractors or what?
All right, so we carefully do not provide lists of contractors exactly. We don't, you know, we're a city arm of the commission, so we don't want to look like we're specifically trying to, you know, support one company versus another company. Certainly everything we have is public record, so you can go through and see what other groups have been successful. There is a list of historic preservation vendors on the Maryland Historic Trust's website. It's their list of contractors. And often when people really say, look, I just want a list of names and addresses, I can provide them that link. You can go on the Maryland Historic Trust list, and they don't seem to have a problem with providing names and addresses of contractors. Now, they will be quick to tell you they can't tell you necessarily the quality of those folks, because that is just a list that people have asked to be on. There's no calling out of bad contractors. The state just hosts the list without comment.
All right, well, Chris, thank you so much. This was extremely interesting, and I'm glad that we have it recorded for future reference. Thank you very, very much for a really enlightening and excellent talk. So if there are no other questions, we look forward to seeing you at other events, and please be sure to check out the Historical Society website to see what's coming up. We've got a lot of things that Chris has in mind for the Historical Society. So please join us, and thank you again for your time today. We really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.